Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Iru Fernando. I'm an addiction and general psychiatrist, and this is Shrink Wrapped. So the very first topic that I'm going to be talking about today is why do people use drugs? So before I begin today's episode, a fair warning. There will be spoilers for the first season of The Wire. So if you haven't watched it yet, I highly suggest you go and check it out. I'm going to be focusing on two different characters. One is Detective Jimmy McNulty, and other is Wallace, part of the Barksdale gang. Both of these people witnessed traumatic events, and they both feel guilty about it as well. So a few years ago, I was living in Boston, and actually I was working at the US Department of Veteran Affairs, also known as the VA. And I have to say, what an amazing place to have training. But the one thing that I actually saw was just how much substance use was used by veterans trying to cope with either combat, physical, or sexual traumas. And just to review what PTSD or post-traumatic stress is, it is a disorder that happens after a person has one of these traumas or has a natural disaster, a serious accident, and then what ends up happening is that they tend to be much more keyed up, a lot more irritable, a lot more easy to be angered. They may be having nightmares that could be very horrific in nature, almost feel like you're right back there. Or it might feel that certain events or stimuli such as a smell or sight makes you feel like you're right back there in the trauma, re-experiencing it right over again. Because of the horrific nature of these events, people often go out of their way to avoid anything that reminds them of those traumas. They can end up not wanting to go into large crowds. And at the end of the day, they don't seem to enjoy or even feel the kind of love that they used to have for the people and things around them. So just how common is it for people who have traumas and PTSD to use substances? Well, it's actually been shown that people who come in for substance use treatment, about 50% of them meet the diagnosis of PTSD, so it's very common.
One of the reasons I love The Wire is because it is the most realistic show I've ever seen of our life and our society. In my profession, I've talked in depth with hundreds, if not thousands of people about the struggles that they have in their life. What is really astonishing to me is to see how similar these experiences are of people who have been overseas and seen the carnage that happens over there, and how similar it is to the gang violence and the people who have experienced that in the United States of America. Keep in mind that the USA tops the list when it comes to the high-income countries in terms of homicides. In fact, there's 25 times more homicides in the United States compared to the other high-income countries in the world. The Wire does an excellent job of showing how trauma can change the behavior and emotions of others, and ultimately lead them to use substances to cope with their pain. There are tons of traumatic events that happen in The Wire, but two notable instances are of Detective Jimmy McNulty and Wallace, the teenager who works for the Barksdale gang.
Let's start off with Detective Jimmy McNulty.
If you recall, the only reason the police are investigating the Barksdale gang is because of Jimmy's insistence and annoyance of the police superiors. And so when his co-partner Detective Kima Greggs is shot and is non-responsive, Jimmy feels it is his fault that it happened and is racked with guilt. You can see this from the way he has this detached, almost stunned expression after she was shot, along with getting physically ill when hearing the audio tape of Kima getting shot.
Shut it off. Shut it off.
So in order to cope with this emotional pain, what does Jimmy do? Well, he turns to what he's been using this whole season to cope with the stress and the anger of dealing with a department that is not interested in catching these killers. He turns to alcohol. During the season, we usually see Jimmy self-medicate with alcohol with bunk after the workday. But after this trauma, we see Jimmy drinking in the office itself, drinking whiskey and at this point is told to stop by his commander, Daniels.
Put that away and work the case.
Next, let's talk about Wallace, part of the Barksdale gang.
Something very similar also happened to Wallace. As you can tell, he actually appeared to be a pretty happy kid despite his clearly rough environment. You can see him being the one to take care of the kids alone. He helps them with their homework. But all of that came crashing down when Wallace sees Brandon, who is Omar's lover, playing in the arcade. If you remember, the Barksdale gang has been trying to get Omar for robbing them. So Wallace calls Stringer, the second in command in the Barksdale gang, to capture Brandon. The next day, however, Wallace sees the body of Brandon, which has been horribly tortured. In fact, you see a scene here where the cops talk about all the terrible things that the Barksdale gang did to Brandon.
His name is Brandon Wright.
Brendan broke fingers, gouged an eye out. All kinds of fun.
Wallace was the one who saw.
Wallace tries to talk about this with Dee and ultimately struggles so much that he ends up buying heroin. He starts to use heroin to cope with the realization that he was at least partially responsible for Brandon's death. You can see the signs of his PTSD in the way he starts to isolate and not come to work. He gets irritable at the kids even when trying to do homework.
Alright, so that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for checking it out. Again, I plan to do other videos not only about why people use drugs, but a little bit more into why and how you can stop using drugs in the future, along with a lot of other subjects about mental health in our society. Any suggestions that you may have on future episodes, I would love to hear it. And lastly, if you can like, subscribe, and share this video, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.